Joey Mills here for Betfred, and I am with boxer, CEO, founder, Benn Shalom. And today we'll be going through Benn's career and looking at his rise and how he became one of the biggest promoters in British boxing today. We all sort of find boxing in our own way. I find people have various different paths in which they become interested in the sport. I'm just wondering, what are your earliest memories of boxing?
Earliest experiences were, I'll always remember Ricky Hatton, because obviously from Manchester growing up and the big nights, and he was fighting so regularly. I think the biggest nights, the Mayweather night, I think that was 2007. I was probably 12 or 13, and it was a huge night for me. I think I remember when Amir Khan burst on the scene after the Olympics, and after, I think he was on ITV, and he was almost on there every few weeks again. And I used to go to Bolton Wanderers and seeing him come through, and seeing Amir Khan, that was a massive moment. And then just growing up in Manchester and having friends that were trying to become professional boxers and going to the local shows was massive. David Hay against Valuev, probably in and around that time as well. Just as a young kid, it was that Goliath, it was the Goliath, and seeing the size of Valuev and seeing David Hay overcome it that night was just massive. I think there's always just moments in the sport, the big nights, that as a young kid really hook you on the sport. And as I say, growing up in Manchester, had a lot of connection to it, and was able to find my route in.
And why do you think Manchester is such an incredible fight city? You listed some of the unbelievable fighters that have come from Manchester there. What is it about that part of the world that produces so much boxing talent?
I think Manchester is, I think it's a special place in general. I think music-wise, it's always been on the forefront of music, and the bands that have come out of Manchester are too many to name. I think football, you've got the two massive football clubs. I think industry-wise, it's a great place to start a business. And then, of course, boxing as well. I think it's a working-class city, and it's a city where you're allowed to dream and you're allowed to express yourself, and there's a competitive edge as well. So I just always found it the best city in the world, if I'm honest. And I think from a boxing perspective, yeah, it's been full of talent. And for me, yeah, the biggest influences have been the Ricky Hattons, even the Anthony Crollers, who I ended up working with a bit, and obviously Amir Khan as well. So it's phenomenal. But I think Manchester's a great place for producing talent across every field.
When did it occur to you that boxing isn't just something that you wanted to watch, that you loved engaging with, but when did you first think boxing is somewhere that I could spend my working life?
Yeah, it was mad really, because I think growing up you always have dreams of working in things that you love and sport. And when I was about 18, 19, I was always starting businesses and trying to find a way and trying to be successful and help my family and things like that. And I started on events in music and I'd do music events and student nights and things like that, and got the bug for business in that sense. But my passion was sport and boxing. And I used to go to the shows and the small hall shows around Manchester at Bowlers and in a very Victoria Warehouse and all sorts around Manchester, and always just thought, wow, you know, it's a tough sport. Why is it like this? Why isn't there more bigger shows? Why aren't the sponsors interested? Why isn't the TV product better? And yeah, I think from there I got fascinated with it. I helped a few fighters that I knew locally, and eventually I was about 22, 23, and I just thought, I do not want to get a real job. And I'd done a law degree, and I just wanted to give it a go and try something that I loved. And boxing was something that I saw so many problems in. I saw so much that could be fixed, that I was excited by it. It was an opportunity, and luckily naive, young, no responsibilities, didn't have to look at everyone. I was able to sort of survive, and especially for the first few years, really on very little, but loving it and battling through it. And every job in boxing, you know, I was doing ticket counting, cash counting, international broadcast sponsorship. Betfred was the first sponsorship I ever sold into, and yeah, I don't know how I convinced them of that, but I just remember the grind and the hustle, and I think I'm so glad that I started from the bottom of the sport, because boxing is a pyramid, and you really have to really understand how it works all the way from the bottom to the top. And yeah, at 23 I decided, you know what, I'm going to jump into this. I remember saying to myself, don't give yourself any way out, because if you can see a way out, you're going to find it. Boxing is a tough place, it's a brutal place, and similar to fighting, had to just keep going, and yeah, eventually started to have some success.
So before there was Boxer, there was Ultimate Boxer, which was a one-night tournament format that you started, partly inspired by Prize Fighter. Some great names that came through that system in your early shows. What made you want to start off with a tournament format as you started off as a promoter?
There weren't any brands in boxing, and I wanted to create a brand that, you know, the younger generation could connect to, that maybe was more innovative, more entertaining, maybe less egotistical. I remember the old school promoters with the big watches and the big suits, and I just thought, like, I couldn't relate to it. You know, I didn't want to show off. It wasn't an ego thing. I just couldn't relate to it, and I felt like that could be the same for a lot of people. And so I wanted to create a brand that understood the next generation and maybe could sell itself. And look, the reality was we didn't have any money, so we couldn't sign any fighters. And so the best idea was to create an entertainment format, like a TV format that could entertain masses but was low cost. And so we had fighters fighting in green, red, yellow, blue, funded a lot by gambling and sponsorship, because we had no TV revenue, we had no TV money. And so it was really just the birth of something. For me, it represented innovation, it represented entertainment, it represented shorter format of boxing, that sometimes I think the longer-winded undercards and the myriad of belts is sometimes too confusing for fans. And so it was just a simple concept that we felt that we could modernise and do within really no budget. And that's the reality of how it started. And yeah, had helped on local shows prior to that, and yeah, I remember my first Ultimate Boxer like it was yesterday, and it was absolute chaos.
And you say absolute chaos there. I'm wondering, are there any moments from those early shows, any particular incidents where things nearly came off the rails and you had to sort of step in and steady the ship?
Yeah, so many. Starting a business in general is really tough, and I'm in awe of anyone that decides to, because, you know, it's not easy, and most of the time you're going to fail. And but in boxing, it's even crazier. And I couldn't get my license. That was the hardest thing, because it was almost like, who the fuck is this guy? He's a young kid, and he's a chancer, and he's just looking, you know, he doesn't know what he's getting himself into. So that was difficult. But I think, yeah, moments that stick out are everything from not being able to pay production until the ticket money came in on the door, and you got the producer saying that he's going to stop the event, and you're waiting for more and more people to come in the door so that you've got enough money in the till to then go and take the cash and give it to the producer so that he doesn't turn the lights off. Big Nasty, I'll always remember, we booked him, God knows why, because it was this entertainment feel for my first Ultimate Boxer. And what we'd done, we managed to get it on Channel 5. They weren't paying anything, it was Spike. And we just said, we were all nervous and things were going off, and we just said, please don't swear, and please don't do anything anyway. He turned up, said, absolutely no problem, son. Gets on the stage and starts asking people to say a ridiculous word. Half the arena had to shout it, then the other half arena had to shout it, and the producer was panicking, crawling around in the truck trying to get it off. And I just thought, well, here we go, that's it for me. But so many moments, and so many near misses, even in the past few years. You know, it's a battle, and there's a reason why there's not many promoters, and there's a reason why it's the same promoters for decades and decades. It's very hard to get in, and I'm thankful for my naivety, and and sort of ambition to be able to do it, because probably if I knew what I know now, would I ever have taken all those risks and come through all those moments? Probably not.
And when did you reach that point where you said to yourself, this is working, I'm confident in myself? Do you ever reach that point, or is it a case of you're only ever thinking of the next show? When did you reach a point where you were confident in Benn Shalom, the boxing promoter?
I don't think I ever thought about that. I almost thought, like, this is the option I've chosen, and I have to make it successful. What else am I going to do? How am I supposed to have a life? I didn't want to do anything else, and so I was really passionate about the sport and the implications of how the judging worked, and how it perhaps was intimidating for certain people to come to fights, and how boxing was viewed, and the murkiness of it, and everything like that all packaged in one was something that drove me. I just felt like that was enough of a purpose to want to get involved in the sport. And then after that, I'd made my decision, and whether I'd sank or swim, I think you've got to have that, and you've got to be prepared to fail. And yeah, I think I probably still never feel like, oh, we've made it, or we've done this, or we've done that. It was still so early on in our journey that it still feels like it's us against the world. And yeah, it's an amazing journey, and yeah, one that, looking back, I sometimes think I can't believe the things that I went through to get to this point.
So by the time of the last Ultimate Boxer tournament, it was just called Boxer. But soon after, you moved away from the tournament style of presenting shows into a more modern take on traditional boxing events. At what point did you decide to make that transition, and what made you make the switch?
Look, we had big ambitions for tournament formats and short formats within the sport, and we still do. What happened was, we got to a point where we'd learned the business, our infrastructure was good, we felt like we were good at what we did, and we knew the broadcaster world was changing, but we couldn't sign fighters at that point. The one thing I realised, I studied the business to the nth degree. I used to have whiteboards full of where people had gone wrong, what people's next moves were, where they go to this broadcaster, what the fighters were that were coming through, the amateur systems, everything. I was absolutely obsessed, and the broadcasting world was changing. So I knew that if I could survive, keep going, build the business with the team that I had, which was very talented, then our opportunity was going to come, because the broadcasting world was becoming more competitive, boxing was becoming more and more popular. And I felt that we could offer something different. And so I think probably 12, 18 months out, I knew there was going to be a major shift in the British broadcasting space. And at that time, yeah, we looked at it and thought, this is probably the time to make that transition and to become a brand that can stand for everything that we want in the sport, and take advantage of where we got to. And obviously Sky Sports was on the horizon, and that allowed us then to have the confidence to go, we're going to start signing fighters now. We're going to make a step into the big time, and that's what happened.
Was there a boxer that you signed that started the domino effect for you, if you like? Somebody who perhaps was an example to other fighters who you were trying to sign, somebody that helps them trust the brand and want to be a part of it?
Yeah, no, look, it's interesting you ask that, because every fighter is a statement of some sort of intent. And so I think along the way, because we've had, if you look at the fighters now headlining today, you know, Adam Azim coming through, Callum Simpson coming through, Vidal Riley, Ben Whittaker, say, Fraser Clark, Lauren Price, Caroline Dubois. These are fighters that are pretty much debuted with us, and only are now getting to the headline status. So in the meantime, we had to make signings that would prove that we could operate at the highest level of professional boxing. And that sometimes they weren't the right signings, or sometimes those signings weren't. It wasn't necessarily just about them. It was about sending a message to the market that we are here to stay, that we're a big promoter now, and also allowed us to, so that when Ben Whittaker and Adam Azim and these guys come through, we can navigate them in the best possible way and get them towards world titles. And so big statements, I think, there's been a few. I think Ben Whittaker was a big one because everyone wanted him, and he was the golden boy. I think Martin McCauley's a big one for us. Chris Eubank Jr. is a massive pay-per-view star. Lauren Price, the gold medalist MBE. I think it's the fighters that everyone wants. Yeah. And when you get the fighters that everyone wants, you know that you've done something right. You know that your business now is attractive to fighters and that you can deliver for them. And yeah, it gives me immense amount of pride, particularly with fighters that start with us, and to see where they go. It's probably the most enjoyable part of the job.
You were signing big fighters, some of the names that you mentioned there. You were on Sky Sports. I'm wondering, was there ever a sense of jealousy or friction from other promoters that you were sort of crashing the top table of British boxing? Because, I mean, Sky Sports in particular, it doesn't really get much bigger than that in British boxing.
Yeah, I think the sport's been run by the same people for a long time, and who was I? And it was going into the bear pit, and whether it was certain bands, whether it's certain fighters, definitely other promoters, you know, you have to have a thick skin, and it was always going to be tricky. And yeah, it was. It has been at times. There's not many people that would want to do this job, that would want to go into this industry. But I think luckily, because of how I'd started the business, because of the 3 or 4 years of not necessarily being able to pay your bills, having staff worrying about wages at the end of every week, every month, working from an estate agent's office, you know, those experiences, that's real pressure. And so that level of pressure could never be compared to the position that we are now, where you have broadcasters behind you, you have elite talent, you have elite fighters, you can pay your staff. You know, this is nothing. And so sometimes I think people look at it and say, how do you cope with this? How do you cope with that? How do you deal with all the animosity? And I just laugh, because this, compared to what it was like, is an absolute dream.
You mentioned there that boxing promoter is a job that perhaps no one would choose to do. I'm just wondering, what don't people understand about the job of a boxing promoter? You always hear people giving their opinions on social media anytime yourself or any other promoter almost does or says anything. I just wonder, what are people's biggest misconceptions about the job that you actually do?
Look, everyone's different. We're all different people. And I think it's the tarnish that we're all the same.
Yeah.
Don King is massively different to Bob Arum. Bob Arum is massively different to Al Heyman. Eddie Hearn is massively different to Frank Warren. They're different people, just as in all different walks of life. You're going to get good ones, good people, bad people. It is what it is. I think there's no special formula, because look how different all the different personalities are that operate within the sport. For me, the fundamental principle that I've always thought about is, how can we get our fighters to fight in front of the biggest audience possible? That's essentially promotion, the opportunity and the biggest audiences. And so that's what we focus on. And yeah, I'd say the biggest misconception is that everyone is the same, because everyone is different.
I want to get into some boxer milestones now. And you mentioned being different from any other promoter. One point of difference for you is the fact that you managed to get this fight into the ring when no one else could. Of course, talking about Amir Khan versus Kell Brook. Just talk us through how you managed to deliver a fight that fans have been asking for a decade.
Oh, it's mad. You know, for me, I remember when the fight was when I first came into the sport, it was a fight that I'd always wanted to see, and it was a fight that I wanted to see, and it was actually a fight I was desperate to make. And I saw it coming quite a way out. And Amir Khan, as I mentioned to you, was everything to me growing up. But Kell Brook was my favourite fighter. He was my favourite fighter. I absolutely adored him. And so it was a surreal moment, you know. I think I remember seeing tweets like, Ben Shalom's won. It looks like he's won a competition, and I thought, fucking hell, I have won a competition. You know, I'd worked so fucking hard, but that fight and those two athletes, to work with them, how did I get it on? I worked my arse off. I got to know each fighter. I got to know the families. I got to know what made them tick, and I got to know what was going to get them in the ring for this fight. And eventually, they wanted to do it with me. And I noticed that, and they had all the offers in the world, and both of them wanted to do it with me, and I'll always be grateful for them. I think a lot of fighters might not look like they know that I'm different, and they want me to succeed because they know what it was like, or they know what the status quo is like. And with those two especially coming towards the end of the year, the end of their career, it was a strange one. I did everything, but then I felt the support from the fighters. And to feel that from Amir Khan and Kell Brook is something I'll always be grateful for, and really was a launch pad for my success and my career. And the signings, you talked about what signing really changed it. I think Khan Brook changed it for me. It was the pinnacle, and yeah, happening in the Manchester arena as well. It was unbelievable, and I think it will always be the night, whatever I go on to achieve and whatever fights that we put on, that night for me, and even my family and everyone around me, that was an unbelievable night. The atmosphere was something like I've never witnessed before and haven't since, and yeah, that was definitely a massive milestone.
Another boxer milestone, and one you'll be looking to repeat later this year at the Albert Hall for another all-female boxer show. But I want to talk about Savannah Marshall getting through those ropes with Claressa Shields. Obviously, the amateur rivalry had bubbled between the two of them, but we finally got to see them do it in the pro game. Just talk me through the process of putting that fight together.
Yeah, it was massive. I think people forget how big that was. It was almost like, for me, the first genuine rivalry in women's boxing. You know, don't get me wrong, there's been big fights, but because they come through the amateurs, because Savannah was the one that beat Claressa, because they'd known each other since that age, it was a storm. And Savannah was so different to Claressa, and it was in every sport you need those rivalries. Tennis is massive when Federer and Nadal have been going at it. F1 was massive when Hamilton and Verstappen in recent years, but women's boxing needed a rivalry like that, and that was it. And women's sport and women's boxing has been incredible for me. I think when you talk about changing the perception of the sport, and that was a massive, massive focus for us. How can we stop boxing being seen as this masculine, intimidating, almost scary place for a lot of people? Women's boxing has been unbelievable, and I don't think fans quite see it, but when you're going into the boardrooms, when you're trying to get the sponsors on board, when you're trying to get the broadcasters on board, women's boxing is a golden bullet. And so we invested extremely heavily. It came off on that night. Savannah Marshall was one of our very first signings, a huge signing, and someone that we headlined with and built in Newcastle, and it was an amazing success to culminate in that night. And yeah, that all women's card, still the highest ever viewed female sporting event on Sky across all sports. It was a historic night, but women's boxing in general has been unbelievable. And we think we're now probably the leaders in the sport, in women's boxing, and that will continue. And as you said, Albert Hall coming up with two fighters, Natasha, Jonas, and Lauren Price, that we've done incredible things with as well. So yeah, it's that night was. You talk about Khan Brook. Khan Brook, probably the biggest night and the most ridiculous moment of my career. I was so young. You know, it's just imagine the fighters are older than you.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. I've still got fighters that are older than me. And so it's not the typical promoter-fighter relationship. I'm extremely close with some of the fighters on a friend level, and I can't do that for the rest of my career, and I recognise that. But you know, I've come through together with a lot of these fighters, but particularly with Khan Brook, that was a dream. That was amazing. I worked so hard for it, and the company did, and it was amazing. But I think the proudest moment, because it was so unique. Everyone told us we could never do a women's night. Everyone said it was unfair on Savannah and Claressa to not put heavyweights on and not put men on at the time, and people just thought it was mental. And so to do something that had never been done before and have that success, and the capacity in the O2 as well, definitely the proudest moment, definitely.
And I've got a feeling that a fight coming up later this year is going to be another boxer milestone. Of course, I'm talking about Chris Eubank Jr. taking on Conor Benn. Now, Khan Brook was a fight that we asked for years that was very difficult to put together. You've gone and done it again with this one. Just talk me through the process of getting from A to B in such a complicated fight. It's been a rocky road to get here. How do you feel that it's finally over the line?
Unbelievable. I think the thing with Eubank Benn is it's bigger than boxing, and there's very few events that are. And so getting it over the line was, of course, tricky. I think you're dealing with. We weren't involved in the first scheduled fight when basically the chaos ensued around the drug testing and the failing of drug tests. We then came into an absolute car crash, which is two fighters that absolutely hate each other. They don't even want to talk to each other. They won't give anything, but it was the fight to make. And both fighters were talking about doing other fights and this and that, but we always knew that was the fight to make. And yeah, it was hard. Everything was an argument. For me, Chris Eubank Jr. is by far and away the A side and is the bigger name. And of course I'm going to say that, but I think his resume proves that, and the fights that he's been in before prove that. But we were dealing with a tricky character and another promoter in Matchroom, and it was almost like full circle. I have to be honest. Coming into the sport, probably Matchroom at the time, and it's changed now with Frank Warren, but at the time when I first came into the sport, they were the leaders and they were the ones really trying to make our life difficult. And so to come full circle and then be at the negotiating table with the Eubank Benn and them on the other side, it's boxing, and it's full of crazy stories, and that is a crazy story. And yeah, eventually got it over the line with obviously the help of His Excellency, because he was able to take ego out of the window, and Conor didn't have to see how much Chris Eubank Jr. was earning, and I think that was half the battle. And yeah, to get it over the line, the interest in it's huge, the history of it's huge, and it's definitely one that will go down in the history books and be remembered for a very long time. So yeah, delighted to be involved in what I believe will be the biggest show in British boxing, if not boxing, this year.
Well, I feel like we've covered the past, present and future of Boxer today. Benn Shalom, thanks ever so much for speaking with me.
Thank you, mate.
Thanks ever so much.
Cheers, mate. Top man.
Cheers, man.